Throughout time, many philosophers have tried to answer the big questions. They debated virtue, justice, the soul, and none of them could have predicted a woman being booted off OnlyFans for planning a sex-petting zoo. That's right, it's time to ask, is Bonnie Blue a moral person? This is a video essay brought to you by me, the 21st century's answer to Diogenes the Cynic. So in this video, we will take 3 common, moral, philosophy/ethical theories and ask ourselves, is Bonnie Blue a moral person? We will also be referencing all of my accumulated knowledge from doing A-level philosophy. Right, so first, the players. We have Immanuel Kant, strict moral daddy. Jeremy Bentham, hedonist, probably loved an orgy. John Stuart Mill, Bentham's student, cleans up the orgy whilst tutting about rules. Aristotle, nerd, probably enjoyed doing maths. And finally, Bonnie Blue, who might dethrone Russell Brand for Shagger of the Year. Derogatory. And now for the theories. First up is Kant. I'm being very careful about how I pronounce that name. Kantian deontological ethics, including the categorical imperative and the humanity formula. Oh, but Alizee, what do any of those things mean? I couldn't possibly do A-level philosophy. Fear not, I shall help you. I don't even know if I've passed yet. The categorical imperative is this. Act only according to that maxim whereby you can, at the same time, will that it should become a universal law.
You know, so people say to me, do you believe in God? And I think, okay, there's a couple of mysteries in that question. What do you mean do? What do you mean you? What do you mean believe? And what do you mean God?
Now, that sure does sound like a whole lot of guff. But really, it just means if everyone did this thing, would society fall apart? It's a little bit dramatic. For example, stealing. If everyone stole, trust breaks down, society collapses, and then we all end up reenacting the purge in a Tesco. This is also known as universalization. Secondly, the humanity formula. Do not use others as a means to an end. Respect the agency and autonomy of your fellow human beings. If you follow these 2 maxims, then you will become a moral citizen according to Kant. That's all really. Not hard, is it? You too can get an A* in A-level philosophy. I bet I got a D. Next up is the utilitarians, Bentham and Mill. Act and then rule. Act utilitarianism, first posited by Jeremy Bentham, is the idea that the ultimate good is to maximize pleasure and minimize pain, and these are the 2 things we either strive to or retreat from. So Jeremy Bentham's first version of utilitarianism focuses on actions, and he uses something called a hedonic calculus, which sounds a lot more sexier than it actually is, to measure how much pleasure any one action can bring. Basically, if an action brings a maximum amount of pleasure for a maximum amount of people, it is seen as morally good. By focusing on each action, however, it's not very accessible for anyone during their daily life to weigh up each action using a calculus. Like, imagine going to the shops. It would be a nightmare. Every action, every choice, having to weigh it up in your head. Rubbish. John Stuart Mill's revision focuses more on rules, like the nerd he is, and makes utilitarianism stricter and kind of overcomplicates it like good one mate. Essentially, follow rules, and these will maximize pleasure, minimize pain. Like don't steal, don't lie, don't murder, probably. He also focused on different types of pleasure, higher and lower. Lower pleasures being more base, like sex, drinking, food. Higher pleasures being things like the opera. It sort of kind of ends up turning into the categorical imperative and is slightly redundant because my man Kant said it first and better and with convoluted language, so there. Finally, we have Aristotelian virtue ethics and the golden mean. What could that possibly mean? Aristotle was an average bloke who liked average things. He hated drama. Extremities? Vice? No. Arete? Living virtuously? Everything in moderation? Yes. Aristotle believed that to achieve something called eudaimonia, aka a good flourishing life, one had to steer clear of vices and achieve a golden mean, to not be too cowardly or too reckless, to not be too horny on main, but also not a cold, sexless husk. Moderation. Moderation is key. That was a very brief recap of the main philosophical theories that we are going to look at. Now, how do we compare all of these and apply these to our favourite comrade, Bonnie Blue? Firstly, for those of you who might be blissfully unaware of who Bonnie Blue is, I envy you. Is this your first day being alive? Bonnie Blue is a top shagger, misogynistic, Andrew Tate wet dream and innovator rolled into one. Famous for her sex stunts so extreme that she got booted off of OnlyFans, Bonnie Blue will probably be the first woman to have an orgy in space. She's already been talking about doing it, but I came up with that idea for her like months ago, so I want at least 20% of money, that is, not 20%, I don't know, human fluids. Notable stunts of Bonnie Blue's include preying on young, barely legal, her words, virgins at freshers, telling women that they owe men their bodies for sex, aka the GK Barry interview, bonking 1,000 blokes in 12 hours, debatable, and recently planned but cancelled and got kicked off of OnlyFans due to it, to hold an event called Bonnie Blue's Petting Zoo, in which she was going to be tied up in a glass box like David Blaine, but unlike David Blaine, let absolutely anyone do anything they wanted to her. Truly one of the finest minds of our generation. Actually, her most famous stunt is pretending she's still 25 or 24. So, let's see how our philosophers and their theories would rate Bonnie Blue and answer the eternal question that's on everyone's mind. Is she a moral person? First up, my man Immanuel Kant. Sexual love makes of the loved person an object of appetite. As soon as that appetite is satisfied, the person is cast aside as one casts away a lemon which has been sucked dry. Immanuel Kant lectures on ethics. Kant's first maxim of the categorical imperative clearly states actions that cannot be universalized are immoral. Now, how would society function if it was a 24/7 bonkathon and every woman had to sleep with thousands of men? It would be sore, sticky, and ultimately nothing would get done. Therefore, we can't really universalize this behavior, and so it fails the categorical imperative. Secondly, the humanity formula, aka not using others as a means to an end. Bonnie's actions rely on the sexual objectification of others, even when she's the one technically being used. For Kant, this is a big no-no. Bonnie Blue also uses men for infamy. She uses them for her sex content and they don't get paid. She even brags about having to sleep with her words, mingers. For anyone who doesn't know what that means, it's British slang for ugly person. It's not a slur or anything like that. And I'm only saying that because I saw a clip in someone's video where someone said the word mingers, but then the person who was reacting to the clip censored it. It's not a slur, it just means ugly person. Anyway, she bragged about having to sleep with right mingers, implying she wouldn't touch them were it not for work. Therefore, because she is only sleeping with most of these men for the bragging rights and shock value, she also fails the humanity formula. Also to note, Kant was a very strict man, obsessed with people doing their moral duty for God or whatever. Though Bonnie would have benefited from a stricter daddy like Kant, Kant would not be the one for her. Verdict? Kant would absolutely despise Bonnie Blue. Next, the Utilitarians. Jeremy Bentham. The pleasures of the bed are in themselves good. The notion of their being bad, a mere prejudice. Offences against oneself, unpublished in his lifetime. Jeremy Bentham would have had an OnlyFans account. Jeremy Bentham's criteria for if an action is moral is based upon maximizing pleasure and minimizing pain. This is also known as the greatest happiness principle. He also wrote thousands of pages of unpublished manuscripts about sex. If we use his hedonic calculus, in which you should weigh up every action by how much pleasure you get out of the following categories: intensity, duration, certainty, propinquity, fecundity, purity, and extent. And if we judged every action of Bonnie's by this, every instance of a bonk or a sloppy blowy, technical term, we can see that in each play-by-play moment she is maximizing pleasure for the bloke involved and for her own narcissistic motivations, I'm sure. And when you consider that she has now slept with thousands of blokes, that's a whole lot of pleasure being maximized. In fact, she had a non-stop orgy with 1,000 guys. for 12 hours. That certainly fills out the duration criteria. Now, there have been some reports of some women finding out that their other halves have cheated on them by sleeping with Bonnie Blue, but clearly the pleasure of all these men outweighs the pain of even a few dozen or even a few hundred women. Verdict: Jeremy Bentham would approve of Bonnie Blue and possibly sleep with her himself and consider it moral to do so. Of course, critics of Bentham point out that his utilitarian logic could justify sacrificing the few for the pleasure of the many. This is called the tyranny of the many, but Bonnie is no philosopher and Bentham was too horny to care. John Stuart Mill. The moral regeneration of mankind will only really commence when the most fundamental of the social relations is placed under the rule of equal justice, and when human beings learn to cultivate their strongest sympathies with an equal, not a slave. The Subjugation of Women, 1869. Now for the absolute nerd John Stuart Mill, protege of Jeremy Bentham and lover of the opera and the abacus. John Stuart Mill's revised version of utilitarianism is about following rules to maximize happiness, not focusing on each individual action itself. He also considered sex to be a lower pleasure compared to the orgasmic higher pleasure of listening to classical music whilst reading poetry and drinking fine wine. He was a little bit of a snob. So I think it's safe to say he would have considered Bonnie Blue as base, as at her orgies there's nary a poetry reading in sight. Mill was also a big believer in women not being treated as property. He was alive during the Victorian era after all, and believed sex without equality was unethical. Seeing as Bonnie is pro going back to a time where women were viewed as property and says that women owe men sex, otherwise men don't owe women respect, loyalty or decency, Mill would have probably spat on Bonnie. Not in the sexy way. Verdict? Bonnie would have to shag Bentham, avoid Mill, and probably kill Kant. Aristotle. The man who is mastered by pleasures is intemperate. The man who avoids all pleasures is insensible. Finally, dusty old Aristotle. By Aristotle's ethics, Bonnie lives a life of excess, vice, and sin. Bonking 1,000 blokes in one day cannot be reasonably seen as moderation to any standard. Aristotle would have called her acratic, ruled by appetite. Also, he would have been deeply confused by the phrase top shagger. Therefore, Bonnie Blue fails the golden mean. Aristotle believed that the ultimate goal of human life is to achieve eudaimonia, a state of flourishing, fulfillment, and moral excellence. It is not just about indulging in pleasure. It's about living virtuously and developing one's character through reason and balance. Aristotle makes the analogy of the archer. An archer must know their target, eudaimonia, and find balance and skill to aim correctly towards it, the golden mean. Comparatively, Bonnie lives a life of extremes. Her actions aren't directed at cultivating excellence or virtue, they're directed towards shock, excess, and fleeting infamy. Not only does she miss the golden mean, but she sprints past it naked, except for a bondage harness, screaming, "Subscribe to my OnlyFans." Rip her OnlyFans. To Aristotle, and many others, this isn't a flourishing life. It's a cautionary tale dressed up as empowerment. Aristotle also harkens from a time where women were viewed as inferior in rational capacity, so I fear if he had ever met Bonnie, it would have reinforced all the negative things he thought about women. So cheers, Bonnie, thanks for nothing. Verdict? Bonnie Blue's petting zoo would have made Aristotle throw up and have a panic attack. So, to conclude, out of the three main philosophical, normative, ethical theories we have looked through, Bonnie fails 2.5 of them. She only half passes utilitarianism because Bentham was a nympho. So I think we can safely, Bentham, conclude from our research that Bonnie Blue is in fact not a moral person. Who could have possibly seen that coming? Bonnie Blue, making philosophers regret the liberation of women since 1985. Thank you for listening to my very serious video essay. Make sure you all like, comment, and subscribe. I make new videos whenever I feel like it. I now have an ASMR sleep channel, repackaging my long form videos into 8-hour chunks so you can sleep through the night to my dulcet tones. I now have a gaming channel, no commentary because commentary gaming channels annoy me, so why would I want to do that? And I am uploading on my slop channel frequently. But if you'd like to see more ratchet pop culture philosophy videos like this, then like, comment, subscribe, let me know. I'm also on Ko-fi now. The link is down in my description. So if you'd like to give me a little tip, maybe one day I'll reach my goal of buying a Freddo. Not to eat it because I'm vegan, but to prove that I'm better than the economy. Thank you guys for listening, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!